Pages 146 to 148. Surprise! The conversation from yesterday isn't over yet. Marty asks where George went. Doc literally says,
"He went that away."
Which is awesome. Marty asks why Doc didn't stop him. Doc says,
"What did you expect me to do, tackle the guy? Anyway, he did it kind of sneaky like."
And throughout this whole conversation Lorraine just stares at Marty and smiles and smiles and smiles. The bell rings, Lorraine runs off to class, and the book finally tells us that her girlfriend had also been there this whole conversation. That makes for two characters magically appearing midway through a single scene, a new record. And Lorraine says that big
"Isn't he a dreamboat?"
line. Wait, no, she didn't say it, she
rhapsodized it. Then she says, "I'll tell you a secret. I'm gonna marry him."
That's it for chapter 8, but chapter 9 continues on the next page, so let's continue, shall we? Marty and Doc watch the two girls walk away and
Ish a perfectly synchronous size.
Note, this is amazing. Marty's all,
She didn't even look at George.
and Doc's all,
You're right.
and Marty's is nerd racist and says,
On the other hand, why should she? He's a nerd. I understand perfectly what that means, but is that a 1985 word? Doc said, yeah. That's interesting, and you're probably right.
only nerd first shows up in 1951, so it's not really a 1985 word, but oh well, who are we to ask for facts? We are madmen, that's who we are. Doc tells Marty that his mum likes him and Marty says his
Wait a minute, Doc, are you trying to tell me that my mother has got the hots for me?
line, as so. And Doc says,
At the risk of sounding crude, yes. If we let it happen, an Oedipal situation could develop.
and then explains to Marty what that is. Marty says that sounds heavy and Doc does that it was awkward in the movie To Zinger.
There's that word again, heavy. Why are things so heavy in the future? Is there a problem with the Earth's gravitational pull?
This despite the fact Marty's already explained to him it's a figure of speech earlier. But he also used the word nerd earlier too, and Doc understood it then too, so maybe the timeline is somehow shifting around them. Or maybe this book is just crappy, I don't know.
What?
Marty said. Doc smiled. He enjoyed confusing his young friend occasionally. But rather than explain the remark or try to add to Marty's confusion, he leapt ahead to another aspect of the Lorraine-George dilemma.
Yep. Doc Brown, who was previously concerned about the entire fabric of the space-time continuum disruption, is now purposely messing with Marty because oh well, who are we to ask for consistent characterization? We are madmen, that's who we continue to be. Instead of the dance, Doc says they need to get Marty's parents to meet at
some mutually acceptable and stimulating premating ritual.
You mean a date? And Marty remembers the warm and wonderful Essex movie house and suggests it. Doc shoots him down, saying, I swear to God.
I think it would be better if we started them out on something a tad less erotic.
Guys, I think I've been watching the wrong movies. Pages 149 to 151. Marty and Doc stand around in the empty halls. Doc looks at a bulletin board hoping to find an idea and finally says,
Aha! There seems to be a rhythmic ceremonial ritual coming up. Have him take her to that. A rhythmic ceremonial dance, to you.
Marty bursts in. Haha, wow, Doc, talk down to people much? Doc Brown, still a jerk. Marty grins and slaps his hands and says it's perfect because they're supposed to go anyway. Doc says,
All right, then. Make it happen.
Which kinda sounds like he's tapping out of this whole adventure thing, but Marty's all.
How can we get that yo-yo to summon up enough courage to ask her?
And that's a head scratcher for sure, so they go to the cafeteria to puzzle it together, and so Doc's sucked back in after all. And they sit there for an hour and no ideas come to them. And then it's lunchtime and George McFly walks in. So Marty and Doc, yes, saunter over to him together. That's what it says, because it's not like they've got anything else going on. Marty talks to George about his writing and George continues not to notice or care that a strange adult man is there, but besides from that it's pretty much like in the movie. Marty asks to read George's stories and George says no.
Hey, you said no, Marty smiled. George looked at him blankly. Doc Brown also directed a blank stare to him. It's the first time I've ever heard George McFly say no, Marty said. I guess it's a joke between me and myself. George looked as if he was ready to bolt.
I really sympathize with George here, I gotta say. Marty pushes George to let him read his stories and old manitis pops up again when Marty busts out I should think for no reason.
It isn't often you meet a writer who's so young. I should think you'd like to have somebody read your stories.
Which makes George deliver a corrupted version of his big line.
Oh, no, George muttered. I mean...
What if they didn't like them? What if they told me I was no good?
That I was no good?
In the movie we get to have a little character realization moment when we realize young George sounds like Marty did at the beginning of the movie. But wasn't that annoying to piece together? To remember things and draw parallels? Yeah, better to have it spelled out for us, just in case.
Marty had the feeling he had heard these words before, himself complaining to Jennifer after he'd been turned down by the YMCA dance committee.
But it turns out this is a breakthrough moment for Book Marty, as he finally sees his father not just as a nerd who should be hated because everyone hates nerds, but as a human being.
Something in his father's vulnerability and desire to create touched Marty. For the first time in a long time, he found himself not only liking the man but understanding some of his anxieties. Suddenly he wanted to help George McFly not only because it would be beneficial to himself but to George as well.
First time in a long time. Yep, turns out our self-interested Book Marty didn't even like his dad in 1985. I always thought Marty thought his dad was a pushover, but I still thought he, you know, at least liked the man. I guess that's why pencils have erasers, huh? Anyway, Marty tells George that Lorraine really likes him. Doc nods his head. This is the first thing Doc does. Why is he here in this scene? Why does nobody care that there is this random old man sitting here in a high school cafeteria? It's so weird.
After a brief expression of adulation, George's face melted into a mask of terror.
More face melting tomorrow?